Hey everybody, it's Jason Jeffries here, Master Jace, the Alliance Project. Starting a new project I figured I'm going to call like the Jedi Academy, something like that. Um, Help give people spiritual teachings. Got a couple empaths, psychics, astrologers, things like that that are in my circle I've been communicating with. So we're going to be able to just kind of give kind of some guru teachings and things like that for people that have specific problems, questions, things like that, to help people on their own spiritual path and journey. Um, but yeah, that was just a little note letting you guys know if you see any change to the channel or anything like that. I'm trying to step it up and change things a little bit here. Um, Got to that critical 1,000 viewer mark. Yeah, I just had a couple things I wanted to go over today. We're gonna have Joseph Reyna on the show later. I'm really excited about that, as you guys are too, I'm sure. But what we're gonna do here is let me do a little screen share. Okay, got that. Blam, blam. Okay, so what we're going to do is go over how the Anunnaki, Inky, things like that, and Enlil are basically have been deliberately hidden throughout biblical Christianity and the Hebrew cultures across the world, Jewish, whatever you want to call them. But what we're going to do is go right to the source, go back to the original. Okay, so when you're reading the Ten Commandments, you read right to left, right to left, right to left, right to left. And that's how you read it. So what I was doing here, see if I can get a bigger image up. Okay, there you go. And there's an ad. There you go. Let's see if I can hide that ad behind me. I guess it went away. But anyways, just to have people understand how they can do this on their own. Start reading and taking meaning and purpose from their own teachings spiritually and I'd say physically, like in the real tangible world here, and see where I'm coming from. We have these symbols right here. Now, if you go to Hebrew lessons, you realize you read right to left, as I said. And anytime they said "I am," I had a feeling that it wasn't what they were saying. Okay, they they would say sometimes they would say "I am the Lord Yahweh Jehovah Elohim YHVH, all these different things, and I seen confusion. But when I started to get into the translating of the Sumerian tablets, I learned a lot. I learned that simple prefixes, two letter words, things like that, always had a bigger, longer meaning than what we have been taught. So, for example, Anunnaki, when you just translate that straight, those from heaven came to earth. On, A-N, means heaven. Ki means earth, K-I. So when you're looking at Gerald Clark's work and you see the Odyssey of Ki, they're talking about earth. So what you realize is in the original Ten Commandments, you had these didn't have vowels back then, okay? So you got to remember they afterwards they added vowels to try to get people to pronunciate things the way they needed to or wanted to, and kind of had more of a language evolved, okay? But it says no ki, okay? So it says Anki, Inki, okay? Inki, the Lord, okay? So literally the first word in the Ten Commandments is Inki, okay? Says, basically says, I'm Inki of the Elohim, of the Anunnaki. He is talking directly to these people, okay? So when you realize that, and you realize that they've been trying to muddy the waters, take out Enlil, Inki, things like that, what they meant was Enki meant like God of the earth. Yeah. He was also called Yah, Ea, um, an Enlil, god of the heaven. He was the Air Force ruler, and we know that Inky was the one in the Navy, or the Earth, the actual one down here with us. God of Earth, not God, the creator of all, the source, the divine source, and all of this. God is, in a sense, everything. It is everything, and it's an untangible fucking intelligence that's beyond human comprehension. Okay, it is everything. We are but a cell in the organism that is the God, the creator of all the energy and the consciousness that flows through us all. So what this person meant was he was the God, the creator, the ruler, the top of the food chain of Earth. Key. Okay. So when you realize this, it says literally right in the beginning of the fucking just in like it was in the Sumerian tablets, it talks about Inky. And anytime they say the Lord, they mean Inky. Inky the Lord. In He, on He, God of, like I said. So you can get into that, and you realize that there's very key passages that, when you go back to the original Hebrew translations, it meant, excuse me, it meant you have to look when deciphering these words at the ones that go before and after. I've said this 100 times. We created man in our image. Okay? That's not one. Just be clear about that. That is not one person. That is not one thing. That is plural. You have to go with the words that flow with the word. You wouldn't say, you'd say, hey, let's go to there and we can do this. You wouldn't say, hey guys, let we go there and let me do that, meaning us. Like it would jumble it up and confuse the language. You wouldn't do that. The words before and after are always the key to if it's plural. So Elohim is definitely plural. Okay. So where they did this was, you got to think when you're hijacking. No, I wouldn't say creating a religion, but all religions have been brought to and imposed by conquerors as a way to enslave people's mind, control people's minds. 'Cause if you're basically accepting an image of God that isn't like a part of you, then you basically become like the spiritual prisoners of these people. And if you're not afraid of the retaliation of man or the law of man, then there's got to be a way to trick people. And it's like saying there's monsters under kids' beds. It's the idea to get people to obey the rules without changing too much. Now you got to remember, these things were all accepted first. Okay, now all these different cultures, after the falling of Atlantis, spread out across the world, and they needed a system to control people's minds. They had to have some kind of system. So they did have different religious texts and stories that had to do with other people, right? So what they did most of the time was there would be little changes, but when they were trying to convert these pagans, things like that, they basically took all these pagan holidays and religions and celebrations and wove them into Christianity, because it all comes from the Sumerian text. The Sumerian text. This all comes from the same story. Now you have later versions and twists of the same story, but it's the hero's journey kind of sort of thing. You can go through and see that if you made 13 points of similarities, that like Hercules and Jesus have like 10 of the 13 similarities, right? Their trials, their judgments, their everything, the demigod idea, the whole thing. Like you could go through with so many different cultures and find these things. The big idea to me was that when this happened, they had to weave in these belief systems. You can't just take it's just like me talking to you now and trying to get you to believe, Scientology or something that's just off the wall, making it up, never having any roots in it. Like most people celebrate Christmas and Easter, things like that, even if they don't know the real meaning behind it. Like Easter was, a fertility thing. That's why the eggs and the rabbits, it was the idea of rebirth, fertility, spring. It was a celebration of the solstices. It was a celebration of rebirth, right? You had Samhain, you had December. It was all holidays around the solstices, and then the halfway points of the solstice. You could just take a clock and see the similarities, the dates, everything. It all lined up. So what you got to do is slowly over time change these things, add things, manipulate, twist things, right? That's why when they said they confused our languages, things like that. If you are a common man, then you can't read these translations. You can't see the code. You can't see the big picture. But once you know how to break these things down, it's just like a Sudoku or one of those puzzles in the newspapers where you get a couple letters and then you can solve the whole thing throughout finding what each one means, right? And the Sumerian language was the first written and spoken language, so it's very basic. It evolved from there. So if you go back to that, and then you realize the Hebrew language was the same thing. It evolved over time. They added vowels. But the idea was, even if you read into it, it says that the Hebrews, God was so holy that they couldn't speak his name. They said it was, and then after a time it said it was forgotten. It was just sacred, right? But the idea was to muddy the waters. Anytime they could twist the meaning, add a meaning, change a word, this and that, or its definition, people right then blam took about it. But you can just go through the Genesis chapter of the Bible and realize that they're most definitely talking about Elohim, plural, okay? Not one, but many. And once you understand that, and then you understand the progression of things, like when they say, it comes from plants started in, the Middle East in the Garden of Eden, in the land between two rivers, grass, and then they went to wheats, and then they went to, shrubs and fruit bearing, things like that, with the seed inside. And you understood that it all evolved naturally, and we could go back a scientific reference and get the same thing. We could understand that what they said was true. It did seem that agriculture started in the Middle East, right there, in between the Tigris and the Euphrates, and evolved over a couple years of agriculture and things like that. But it was not as far back as you would assume. So it seems that these seeds, this agriculture, these things were definitely domesticated and then brought out from there as they evolved. So it's not the idea of like evolutionism. It's the idea of that this stuff was spoken to us, told to us in this simplified story that we have thousands and thousands of tablets that tell us in greater depth with different names. Like I said, the biggest ones most people need to read if they want to get the understanding and see that the Bible isn't necessarily a plagiarism, but a different take on the same story. Is you read the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Atrahasis, and the Enuma Elish. If you read those three things, you'll see all these stories, the same ones, the biblical flood, the creation epic, all these things coming together, tying together. It's 6,000 years older, so the story's the same. Get this up here. I'm trying to pull up some more images for us. So. Bear with me for a second. I have no idea how to work this on here yet, so I'm trying to get it. One. Oh, there it is. Okay. Okay. All right, I'm back. Sorry. Pizza guy came. Had to get the girlfriend pizza. She's hungry. Pregnant, she gets hungry. All right. So what we're gonna do is look over Mora Balishna's book, a book that will forever change our ideas about the Bible, the gods coming from space, a quest for free thinkers, by Mora Balishna. The god of the sun. Often you would tell me the sun cannot be wounded. It dies at sunset for a few hours and rises again. Many books have been written addressing the issue of ancient human cultures having contact with extraterrestrial civilizations. The hypothesis is that these alien visitors were possibly the source of our own physical origin, as well as our cultural evolution. Such books have approached the topic by quoting and analyzing excerpts from the Old Testament, based on established translations such as the King James Version, the Bible we all know. Is there a chance to learn more, go deeper, transform our current assumptions into certainties, and have accurate feedback? Starting with the original Hebrew, the ancient text of the Old Testament, this translation has been simplified. In the pages that follow, we will publish the exact and literal meanings of each letter and phrase in Hebrew translated in English. Hence the surprise for hypothesis that the church cannot avow, because they would undermine the foundations of faith, a made-up credo which speaks of God who created man in his own image and all resemblance, whose passages that clearly mention the presence of alien life and extraterrestrial intervention are quoted in original Hebrew language, followed by an accurate literal translation, word by word, using a unique and easy-to-follow graphic system that immediately links to the original text. This enables the reader to have direct access to the biblical text. Modern-day Judeo-Christian traditions will probably never acknowledge this information to the public, as it would tear down the facade of their man-made invention of all-knowing, all-seeing God who created mankind. Once that facade is gone, the structures that we know as Christianity, Judaism, are likely to crumble right down along with it. The implications are staggering. In the pages that follow, we examine Ezekiel's vision of a celestial chariot, UFO, in the story of Elijah's kidnapping, abduction. In addition, we will analyze the visions of Zechariah, the Kabod, the so-called God's glory, the concept of Baraka, and also biblical passages relating to angels. Perhaps most interesting, you'll be able to read the literal translations of the verses which describe the creation of man, a translation that can confirm a surprising, fascinating, and unexpected possible truth considering the book at issue, the Bible. Finally, we look at another passage in the Old Testament which includes the disconcerting statement, God dies. An easy reading. This work stems from careful analysis of the text, relying on original meaning of consonant roots which represent the basis of Hebrew vocabulary, as published in the dictionaries of the Biblical and Aramaic Hebrew used worldwide. To date, these original meanings have been either generally not examined or deliberately not taken into account. You will also read the assertions of those church exponents who deal with these issues that are extremely delicate, the potential risk of Jewish Christian theology. This work is complemented by the analysis of external documentation, texts and stories that confirm the Old Testament Bible tells us. This examination of the literal translations from the original Hebrew text with the included passages quoted makes the translations useful to both the scholar as well as the reader who's approaching the material for the first time. The book closes with a hypothetical reconstruction of historical events formulated on the basis of new information. We present a new history of the new man which arises out of us having direct access to the original source of the text. Chapters of this book are constructed so the reader can study them, also be read separately, without the need to follow the numerical sequence, and can therefore be used as an easy means of comparison and reference. The fundamental question. The exegesis gives birth to the legitimate fundamental question. If the God described in the Bible is not a spiritual and transcendent God, but instead an extraterrestrial visitor or visitors, should we still refer to this information as divinely inspired or as sacred texts? From where and from whom do they originate? In the 10th chapter, we plunge into the canonical Christian text that is universally regarded as the most mystical inspired, the Gospel of John. Here again, the reader may be surprised to learn some additional information which will allow him or her to continue this journey, a free path of correct knowledge. Have a good trip. Directions on how to read the passages quoted in Hebrew through literal translations. In transcribing the Hebrew text, only the consonants are indicated, using the original source as it was before the vocalization made by Masorets and Pointers. The following pattern illustrates what we wanted to provide the reader. The original translation, the translation to that, and then the words. With our image as our resemblance. We make man in our image, okay? Our image, our resemblance. The first line contains the phrase written in Hebrew, which is read right to left. The second line contains the English translation following the precise order of the Hebrew text. Each single word, separated from the other by a dash, is to be read right to left in order to acquire meaning. Dashes are used to highlight the single components of the term, which must be analyzed when making a literal translation. The bold line contains the English translation, now proceeding from left to right. Each phrase is arranged from the following English language rules of consecutive, namely in phrasal order. The Tigris and the Euphrates. And the king, and the Kittas, the long-necked men. The Old Testament writings are generally derived from stories written by other people, such as ancient Sumerians. These stories have given rise to certain theories, which are summarized here in the first chapter. These theories, we can call them truths, that once confirmed will cause the end of the great illusion, great deception. Our current religious thought system based on concepts developed by men. This religious thought system, which includes Christianity, is being operated by those who have exploited pretentiously named sacred texts in order to build a structure of power and control for manipulation. This is the time for that to all end, and it is time for truth. For instance, we are interested in knowing how, where, and when the Bible speaks of Anakim, concrete beings that have come to earth from other worlds. Through the Roman Catholic Church now acknowledges this information, they continue misleading and represent the Anakim as spiritual entities. As we analyze the Old Testament, we identify these concrete beings using their correct Hebrew names. For instance, those from heaven to earth came. In Hebrew, Anakita, instead of the more well-known and published Sumerian name, Anunnaki. This story that can be disconcerting at times, but finally, full of fascination. And one that also brings an overwhelming liberating potential for those who walk a free-thinking path. It is a story far removed from the dogmas, illusions, and forced interpretations of modern Christianity. Many religions tend to be adapted to a preconceived vision of divinity, that one which immediately identifies the presence of the word God with transcendence. They create an alternative world, a divinity far from man in substance and form, vague and not able to be represented. You will soon find out the Bible talks of many other gods, precisely. Most ancient texts will tell the stories of these gods and the connections of the origins of man and the Jewish people. These texts tell about times when men still walked with gods, namely the Anakims, or Elohims. We find that men used to talk and eat with them, make arrangements with them, serve them, but also use them and betray them, follow them and abandon them, all according to the interests of the moment and the contingent circumstances. This was a historical era when men choose their gods from among many possibilities, never asking the question of just one God. The divine was perceived in a totally different way from which it has been eventually built. Once men lost this direct contact. Basic assumption in reconstructing the human history, scholars have progressively predated the original origins of civilization. Firstly, they considered the Greek culture, and they moved their attention to the grandeur of Egypt until they discovered Babylon and Assyria. Finally, they turned their attention to the Sumerian ancestors, a civilization dating back to even earlier, yet to around 3000 BC, and the Sumerians are indeed the source of these theories mentioned in the opening chapter. So what do the founders of the whole civilization tell us? First of all, we are told that there's a planet in the solar system, unofficially named Nibiru, which has a long retrograde orbit equal to 3,600 Earth years. Its name, Nibiru, means crossing planet, because this celestial body crosses the ellipse of the opposite direction traveling by other planets, Mars and Jupiter in particular. This retrograde orbit let us assume that Nibiru was not generated along the sun with other planets. it may have been attracted or captured by the gravitational forces of our solar system, and this is exactly what the Sumerian tales to say. According to the author's interpretation, the official science considers alternative. The science of this planet could actually have impacted the Earth, producing not only a Great Depression, which is located under the Pacific Ocean, but also could have formed the moon and created the asteroid belt. But what does modern science say? Here's a brief summary of the findings of the official position scientific community that has somehow confirmed the aforementioned incredible, unacceptable astronomical hypotheses. 1999, Dr. Mario Martino, astronomer at the Astronomical Observatory of Torino, found that the deviations of the orbit of 82 comets, including the famous Halley's Comet, are due to a large planet about 3 times the size of Jupiter with a retrograde orbit that's compared to the orbital planes of other planets is inclined at 25 astronomical units, also equal to the distance from Earth to the Sun, so 25 times that. In 1972, examining Halley's Comet's trajectory, Jay Brady from the Lawrence Livermore Laboratory found out that also the orbit of this comet, like those of Uranus and Neptune, were disrupted. To explain this phenomenon, he assumed the existence of Planet X at a distance of 64 astronomical units from the Sun, which is an orbital period of 18 earthly years, half the period indicated by Sumerians. NASA Pioneer missions have largely confirmed that there must be a celestial body about twice the size of the Earth with a solar orbit at the distance of at least 2.4 billion kilometers beyond Pluto, with an orbital period of more than 1,000 years. James Christie of the U.S. Naval Observatory suggested that the inclination of Pluto and Uranus and the movement of Pluto in the retrograde orbit of Titan, one of Neptune's moons, are due to the passage of this intruder planet in the solar system, roughly 2 to 5 times the size of the Earth, with an orbit inclined at a distance of 2.5 billion kilometers beyond Pluto. Ray Reynolds from the Ames Research Center says that the astronomers are so confident of the existence of the Planet X that they only have to name it. It's called Planet X, not only because it's formally unknown, but because it's the 10th planet of the solar system, in addition to the 9 known: Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. As a result of the research carried out by RAS, Infrared Astronomical Observatory, the heat detected by the presence of a large body in the area of the Orion constellation, which moves very slowly. In 1983, the managers of IRAS project granted an interview with the Washington Post scientific section. During the interview, they declared something that was immediately reported by various American newspapers with expressions of great effect. They actually wrote that the astronomers were confused about the presence of the gigantic object. The mysterious celestial body in our solar system was a cosmic enigma. On the occasion that the director of the project RAIS, G. Lubauer, said he did not know what this was about, but NASA made a public statement saying that the celestial object RAIS detected might be approaching the Earth and could be the 10th planet that astronomers have been seeking for some time. William Gooch, chairman of the New York Planetarium, says it's possible that the 10th planet has already been reached but has not yet been observed by optical telescope. They are looking for it in the southern skies at a distance of approximately 2.5 times that of Neptune. A dark celestial body has also been seen, a planet or brown dwarf star, orbiting in the area of Sigma Orionis, which has been called SORI-72. In August 2000, researchers at the Southwest Research Institute of Colorado and the University of California in Santa Cruz developed a computerized simulation which shows about 4.5 billion years ago the Earth was hit by a celestial body at least as large as Mars, and perhaps even larger. The impact would have created the moon and projected a large amount of debris all over space. Jay Murray, UK's Open University, at the J. Matisse University of Louisiana, affirmed the gravity exerted is by now invisible but very large body, which considerably slow down the exit of the terrestrial probes of the solar system. This planet, the Sumerian stories continues, will be inhabited by those who they call the Anunnaki. Those from heaven to earth came, corresponding to the Bible's Anakim. These individuals would landed on our planet in search of gold because the metal was essential to create a sort of greenhouse effect for their planet. Pulverized and released into the atmosphere, it would slow the process of gradual cooling that Nibiru was suffering. How can we not recall the myths spread amongst every corner of the earth, spoken by Western writers like Hesiod, Plato, Ovid, talking about an unspecified golden age in a far remote past, an era when gods used to live here among us? If these stories are true, it becomes easy to identify this primordial time as one in which the gods, that is to say, these beings who came from above, arrived on earth in search of gold. These stories would no longer be narratives of fantasy, telling of an unreal but desired happy time, but instead would be the retelling of specific events, when gods really were here on earth and mining gold was the reason for their presence. Indeed, this was an age entirely devoted to research, mining, and the processing of gold. An age when men had a direct relationship with the gods. According to this amazing theory, 600 members of the Anunnaki, Anakitas, Anakim descended to our planet in 12 groups of 50. They built their first base in Eridu, an outpost to the extreme south of Mesopotamia, whose name, according to the aforementioned scholars, home of the faraway world, home away from home. It stood on a hill artificially erected at the mouth of the Euphrates River. Perhaps this coincides with the memory of the biblical God of Genesis dividing the waters in order to obtain dry land and make life on earth possible. As we know, the ground was rich in oil, and therefore a valuable source of energy for the structures that were built, moreover, the vast plains appropriate for the construction of landing strips. This entire expedition was commanded by a being who we might consider the emperor, named Anu, the absolute ruler living on Nibiru. Operational direction was initially given to two of his sons, Enki, who was later joined and eventually replaced by his brother Enlil. A shift of command occurred when Enki took controls of the diggings in South Africa gold mines in the territory that would nowadays correspond to Zimbabwe. The Sumerians say that after tens of thousands of earthly years of laborious diggings, the Anunnaki rebelled and demanded to be released. After several attempts to settle what they would call a labor dispute, Enki developed an alternative solution that would prove to be truly decisive. With hindsight, not only for them but also for us, Commander Enki could observe some small hominids, Homo erectus or Homo habilis, and thought they would genetically be modified in order to replace the tired Anunnaki, who were constantly protesting and revolting. Sumerian myth tells us that the gods, forced to work in these gold mines, digging and piling up earth, complained for their quality of life and blamed Enki for their troubled situation. Enki's mother urged her son to intervene and help the Anunnaki, who were working extremely hard. She suggests that he created a substitute for the gods, a double, so they could break free from the burden of work. She suggests that he create a mold or some servants. Her son replied that such creatures actually already existed, and he asked her to modify the species and place them upon the image of themselves, the gods. Thanks to the scientific knowledge, the Anunnaki conducted a number of experiments genetically manipulating the hominids with grafts of their own DNA. This project, developed in collaboration with Herzog, Enki's wife, was known as the Mother Goddess, or Mami, she who gives life. Working in the lab as a creational room, after several attempts which were failed, they produced a new creature called Lulu, meaning the blended one, the mixed one. A product of a mixture of genetic heritage, this new creature was called Adama, from which we get the biblical term Adam, the one on earth, the earthly one. These beings from earth to heaven came, had in fact created Homo sapiens. All this happened about 300,000 years ago in northern Zimbabwe. It was right around the time that in that part of East Africa that the paleontologists would trace an appearance of Homo sapiens. The Anunnaki then produced a race of tough workers, just intelligent enough to understand their creators, owners, and needs and commands. This reminds us of the phrase that we were created to love and serve God. It probably contains far more truth than the ones we think. These gods, in effect, created a race destined to menial jobs. Thus, isn't it a curious coincidence that Genesis 2.2 literally tells us after having created man that Elohim rested from all his work? Wasn't this exactly the purpose of the Anunnaki? Reproduction of the Sumerian seal representing deities watching a crude and probable product of their experiment. The figure of the Mother Goddess, which is variously studied, analyzed, and symbolically interpreted, and psychoanalytically explained in being identified with Mother Earth, is indeed quite simply this female Anunnaki, a medical expert in genetic engineering who can be quite rightly considered the mother of all mankind. Geneticists tell us that our DNA differs from the primates closest to us a very significant percentage, less than 2%. Could this 2% be incorporated in hominids to drive the rapid evolutionary development that led our species to its final result, Homo sapiens? Our closest relatives have culturally and technically evolved much more slowly to the point that they cannot even remotely be compared to us. Do we really have something inside of us often to referred to as divine, which could mean merely a portion of DNA belonging to those individuals who came from above and genetically engineered us. According to these ancient texts, the slave, the Adama, or the Lulu, was then used in the gold mining area of South Africa, in the area the gods referred to as a base. Enki, who presided over the mining work at the Africa base, was also known as the lord of the Apsu. This is the lord of the basic lower parts. The term Apsu, Absu, was later derived from the concept of abyss, the basic realm, which later took the definition of underworld realm. Here too, the explanation of such much simpler than all the variation ruminations generated by religious and anthropology and psychoanalysis and so on. The real psychoanalytic descriptions of the abyss, of hell, of the subconscious, along with the theories that followed, constituted the basis of the concept of conceiving a heavenly reward versus a possible horrible punishment in an endless hell. The lord of the abyss was none other than the leader of the mining that worked on the land at the base, in the depth of the southern mines, obviously considered the lower part of the planet by those who lived in the northern hemisphere. The workers efficiently made his presence useful, also in the land of Sumer, the biblical Shinar. Homo sapiens then worked for the Anunnaki, delivering services that were progressively more sophisticated. From the simple and brutal ground digging, he eventually became a true servant, useful for any type of task. This creature would work under the control of supervision of the gods, and perhaps it is precisely for this reason that the territory in the southern central Mesopotamia was named Sumer, meaning the land of the guardians. Here there's an interesting correspondent with the Egyptian stories recalling the so-called Zet-Tepe, prime time, the primordial period between Neteru, the guardians that inhabited the earth. And indeed, all Middle Eastern cultures seem to share a common reference to this area when gods were on earth and watchmen working for them and serving them. Men were also taken to their experimental lab and crop cultivation situated in the east, in Eden, the house of the Rices, God's home, according to Sitchin, where all sorts of trees sprouted, delightful to see, and good for food. We also know that these new creatures were produced in a series. The process was this: the DNA was first taken from the young Anunnaki's blood and then inserted in the hominid's egg cell. Upon receiving the new genetic material, the egg would be implanted into the uterus of an Anunnaki female who carried the fertilized egg through pregnancy into finally childbirth. Both males and females were produced through this technique of genetic engineering. This, by the way, is precisely the function that the myths give us to the mother goddesses. This new creature, the Adama, or the Adam of the Bible, was a hybrid. As such, unable to procreate, and was not be able to procreate. The Adama did not possess any knowledge that could make him similar to the gods, such as the ability to give life to another being. Adam and Eve. There was constant rivalry between Enki and Enlil, the two sons of the Lord of the Empire. This rivalry had consequences of the new species that had been created in order to meet the needs of the Anunnaki who worked in the mines. Enki loved his creation, decided to give it knowledge, absolute knowledge, which would free it from its creators, the ability to reproduce independently. In short, the know-how that would make it similar to gods. He did this without approval of his brother. We report here an element that immediately connects to the biblical stories. Enki was depicted as a snake, a creature that, living underground dens, knew the most in-depth secrets. It is therefore correct to say that the snake god, Enki, is one who gave Eve the ability to reproduce. Genesis, chapter 3, clearly recalls this event in the story of the snake tempting the woman and encouraging her to access knowledge. This was the sole step that the gods did to forbid, because they knew it would take mankind, Adam, the earthly, towards the ultimate emancipation of freedom. When Enlil, the elder brother, came to know of this, he became enraged, and then ousted the male and female from Eden, a protected paradise. Paradise, incidentally, in that term comes from Iranian paradisia, enclosed place. Enlil sentenced them to seek food for themselves. He also told the female she would procreate, experiencing great pain, and this understandable considering the far creation was prerogative only of the Anunnaki females. Men then began to multiply on their own and populate the territory. Now the Bible tells us that gods, children, whose females were obviously scarce, saw men, Adam and earthly daughters, and were infatuated. They were joined with them and begat, because the two species were naturally compatible. The fact that aroused the wrath of Enlil, who did not like the new creature and openly condemned the racial mingling. In the meantime, it had also become very difficult to manage the problems resulting in the uncontrollable growing mass of people under the difficult situations. Enlil decided to use a natural event that was about to occur in order to erase Adam and all of the other beings born from the relationship between the two species, flood. The Anunnaki knew the immense and inevitable disaster that was about to strike Earth. The gravitational force exerted by the proximity of Nibiru was causing the polar cap to shift. Disastrous consequences were about to affect the whole entire planet. This effect, worldwide known as a flood, happened about 13,000 years ago, at the end of the last great ice age. The Anunnaki knew about it, and Enlil took advantage of this opportunity to achieve his goal at the expense of humanity. He decided to temporarily leave the planet without alerting mankind, condemning them all to extinction, along with the animals inhabiting the planet. In fact, the gods left their ships and returned only to the flood when the floodwaters receded. We said, however, that Enki, creator of mankind, loved his creatures, and driven by this fleeing, decided to save at least some of them. He therefore warned one of them, Udanapishtim, or the Sumerian Noah, of the imminent danger and give him necessary instructions to rescue himself, his family, and some animals useful for the survival. Enki knew that at the time the normal conditions of life were reestablished. Thus, God, Enki, provided Udanapishtim the building plans and instructions on how to build an ark that could preserve human species from the impending disaster. As it is curious to note how the Bible's editors, anxious to affirm the oneness of God, have visited this conflict between two gods by turning into a sort of inner conflict experienced by one God. He decides to wipe humanity from earth, and then the second thought he finally chooses to redeem one and just pure man. He had found his favor, and with him he made a new pact. Okay, so this man in the myths all over the world, variously named Noah in the Bible, Utnapishtim in the Babylonian Epos, Gilgamesh, Ziusudra in the Sumerians, Cooks to the Aztecs, Powaka to the Indians from Delaware, Yavasata in Hindustan, Guaitak to the Celts, Zika in the Patagonia, Noah to the inhabitants of the Amazon, Nu'u in Hawaii, Nuwa to the Chinese, curiously with a similar pronunciation. Egyptians attribute to Thoth the desire to erase humanity in the Book of the Dead. God says, I will erase all things I created. The earth will collapse into the abyss of waters when the flood comes, and then will return to peaceful as the beginning. The whole humanity understands this event recorded for the first time by the Sumerians, those who had the privilege of walking with gods and living with them. The people who at the end of their time also received the entrance received along the path of humankind with civilizations and cultural evolution. Let's continue now with our brief summary. After the flood, the course of human evolution goes on. Gods established new cities and new command centers, made up important land reclamations in order to some part of the territory inhabitable. They created elevated places free from mud. The same name in Egyptian means elevated land. And they divided the world into spheres of influence attributed to the different children of the Lord of the Empire. There are three main areas of development where archaeology has found proof that the existence of a major human civilizations. Lower Mesopotamia, Sumer, the Nile Valley, and the Indus Valley. The fourth area referred to as sacred. It was dedicated and reserved for the Anunnaki. Therefore, Adams could not access it. This area was probably corresponding to the current Sinai Peninsula. The Egyptian myths are the origins that tell us of Ptah. The name of the Egyptians' origins not Semitic, came from beyond the sea, the Red Sea Strait, and called Ta Naturu, the land of the guardians. It was the land of the primordial gods, known as Tilmun, the place of the flying machines. In short, there's a new space station built to replace the previous ones that was destroyed by flood, with the headquarters on Jerusalem. Jerusalem thus became the world's center, target of the missions of the planet Earth, where at the time of Abraham reigned Melchizedek, the king of justice, the righteous king. It's written in Genesis chapter 14. In these new settlements, the Anunnaki chose some Adams to govern their stead, and began to pass on part of the scientific and botanical and astronomical knowledge. Coincidentally, Sumerians say that long after the flood, the command center was brought to Earth around 3670 BC. which is when the Sumerian days computation in the Jewish calendar actually began. Thus, the priest caste was born, made especially of skilled people chosen by the Anunnaki to reign over the atoms. Originally, they were semi-gods, individuals whose veins were flowing in the Anunnaki blood, children of the union between the atoms and the gods. They acquired their power from knowledge, which was transferred only by a few. These semi-gods are meant to be intermediaries between the Anunnaki and the new terrestrial species. We recall that all ancient people later claimed to have received knowledge directly from the gods, and many populations have developed traditions of initiation, a system of knowledge transmissions that confers the fundamental knowledge of few privileged individuals deemed worthy to receive it and able to understand and manage it. Contrary to what was later said, this is a very practical knowledge concerning the technical and cultural development of the people to be governed, construction, cultivation, and breeding techniques, as well as the mathematics, scientific, and astronomical knowledge. These skills and abilities would have appeared to be magical in the eyes of the people deliberately kept in ignorance. In short, the knowledge was nothing spiritual, but instead a kind of practical knowledge, guaranteeing that few could exercise power to control of these activities necessary for the development of subjected human populations. The representatives of the gods were ancient king priests, as they were also concerned with practical tasks. They would manage the gods' properties and wealth. They would ruin their daily lives as masters of the house. In addition, they would also take care of those dwellings that were considered their worship spaces, those that we nowadays call massive Templar centers. King priests, above all, possessed astronomical knowledge, a basic science for Anunnaki, who needed to know precisely the planetary orbits in order to plan their trips from and to home. Some say that astronomical knowledge of ancient peoples arose from the need for them to be able to develop and practice agriculture, but we all know that the astronomical information needed to cultivate fields is very minor and confined to events that affect at most the weather, as possibly the moon cycles. In fact, they held the so-called tablets of destinies, astronomical maps which detailed the upcoming cosmological events. Scientists knew how to predict exactly what was going to happen in the sky, even several millennia in advance, including the location of stars and planets at any given time, eclipses, and the comet's movements. Okay. So I'm going to pause it right there, make a part 2 where we go and continue on. Hope you guys are enjoying it so far. I just don't want to make the videos too long so nobody can really follow it or absorb it all. Everybody's got a life and has stuff to do. So hope you guys enjoy that. And yeah.